So when you land in After Effects, it's going to look a little bit like Premiere's launch in that if you've had projects open, they'll be there as an option. If not, you can say New Project. So we'll just get this out of the way so you can see. And similar to Premiere in that there's a timeline, there's a viewer window, and a media window. And that's really all we need. So our media is going to get imported over here. We're going to be able to see our composition here and have a timeline here. What's likeliest to happen for you guys is that you're not actually originating anything in After Effects, but doing your origination in Photoshop in layers and producing assets that are then animated in After Effects. So let's consider a situation like that for a shot like this. So I want to run down some of the usual kinds of camera things that we're going to need to do. In the Photoshop side, you want to make sure that you're working in layers, because if, well, I should take that back. Depending on what the shot is, layers are necessary. If it's a zoom straight on in, it can be flattened. If it's just a pan left and right, it can be flattened. But as soon as you want to add any kind of parallax to things, or depth of field gags like a pull focus, those are things that you're going to want to have as separate layers. And the other part of that is make sure you label your stuff. If it's not labeled, it's going to get pretty ugly. So, for example, on this comp that I have here, you can see I've got, let's zip ahead to that. So I've got road signs as separate elements. I've got the car as a separate element, and I've got kind of a couple of lines of road and a sort of a tree line back there and sort of a fill. This is a kind of a tricky angle to work with because it's not a linear left-right or a straight down the camera nose shot. So anything that we do here is going to be a bit of a trick, an illusion of movement rather than a real one. We'll take a shot like this though for starters and just go through some basic ones. So I'll do a zoom, I'll do a pan, and I'll do a little bit of a dolly shot where we get some parallax on it. So this one is, I think this is 4, yeah. So I've labeled it shot 4. I've labeled all my characters. They have kind of a timeline where they animate a little bit. I'm going to leave my animation and work with it intact in After Effects. So, big project, animatic project in Photoshop. I've done all my sort of linear drawing. I've stacked layers. I've grouped layers. If I import that as a project, Command-I or File, Import that project, I'll be able to maintain all of my layers, and they should contain their labels and things like that. So here it is, my PSD, and here's where an important distinction needs to be made. If you hit the default for footage, it flattens it. So I no longer have layers. What we want here is composition. And what's nice about Photoshop to After Effects stuff is if you have stuff that's outside the boundaries of the shot, like maybe you brought in a big shot of clouds and it's in the background, if there's stuff off the pasteboard, you've got it still. So you can slide it across and animate it. So it's not cropped as you might with some exports. So we're going to say composition, and if you have stuff that's too big, we'll say composition, retain layer sizes. I'll say it. I don't think I have anything like that, but play it safe. If you've saved things sequentially, like this is my version 1, this is my version 2, and you didn't change the name of it except for a number at the end, watch out for Photoshop sequence. It'll bring in that as a 2-frame or 5-frame or however many versions you did of it sequence, and suddenly your movie is only 4 frames long because he did 4 Photoshop documents. How come it's not a minute? I did a minute, and it's now 4 frames long. It's missing some stuff. It's because it's trying to read it as a frame. Each frame is a project. So editable layer styles, okay, and this is going to look neat, but then it's everything that I made is a package, basically. So I have my main timeline, which has the entire sequence in it, and you'll note that each one of those is their own full-length layer all the way through. But then I also have stuff like here's 4 by itself. It has all of the lead-up of time prior to it, and it's missing my background that was universal to the whole project, so suddenly it's nighttime there. So we'll need to, maybe just need to copy that over. So I'll steal it out of here. Just Command-C to copy it, send it back over here, and back at the beginning here we'll paste it. And just like Photoshop, if it's on top, it's in the way, so I'm going to send it to the back. So now I've essentially recreated what I had there. Okay, so a couple things we can do. Let's say we want to do a simple little push in, something to just kind of keep the shot alive. That would logically be everything's scaling. Photoshop doesn't have scale as something that you can animate, so we have to come here for even just something simple like that. Alternately, in Premiere, you could just put a little snip on either end of that shot and you can scale it in Premiere. So if that's all you want to do, that's probably the easiest way to handle it. But anything like this where we've got a lot of different layers and we want to do the same thing to them, we're doing what's called pre-comping. And in that case, we might be best off selecting our item right here. And I'll trim it to the, I guess this is 4, right? I'll trim it to the beginning of the shot so we know exactly how long it is. So the shortcut on here for people who don't have the extended keyboard is, I think it's, not the arrow keys. I have the need to do frame by frame stuff, or the desire to do it because I want accuracy. Yeah, so on the Mac, it's the function key and the up and down arrows let you scroll through a frame at a time. You also have, it's a playback tool up here somewhere. Yeah, where you can go a frame at a time too. So if in doubt, you can do that. I'm going to trim this shot down to just the part that we're using rather than keeping all of that excess there. We can do one of two things. We can either drag the tail end of this off, which is perfectly acceptable, but you got to be real accurate. I'm zooming in on the timeline here with the plus and minus keys to make sure I'm at the exact beginning of that shot. Seem to be. And then I'll go to the end of it, and I'll trim off the end as well. So again, control, no, function. Find the beginning of that. There it is. So this is the first frame of the next shot. So I want to be sitting on this shot as I trim it. The shortcuts for these, Option and the brackets, the close bracket, which is not a parentheses, but like a parentheses, the boxy ones. Option, open bracket is the beginning or set the end point. Option, close bracket, I'm going to hit that right now, trims off the tail end of that shot. So now I've got it to just the stuff itself. So this is a group. And that group can be, we can do anything we want to it. In here, under the triangle drop down for that layer, we go transforms. We've got about 5 things we can animate. Anchor point is the center of it. And right now it's smack dab in the middle of it. There's nothing that we need to do there, but that is a way to kind of control the pivot. So if we wanted to rotate from something other than the middle, we might move the anchor point. So if I move it to the base of this and then reposition it back to the bottom, now when I rotate, it's going to rotate from that bottom center rather from the middle. So that's what the anchor point does. Just undo that. Position is going to give us our left, right, and up and down. Notice it's an X and Y here that are represented by the number of pixels into the shot it is. So 960 across is half of 1920, half of 1920, and 540 is half of 1080. So this means that the shot is centered, but I can, pan it on or pan it off. Just like we looked at in Photoshop, let's do it. We'll do a scale, a little zoom in first. Just like we said in Photoshop, pick the beginning of the shot or whenever you want that move to start, and you'll create a keyframe. That's a little stopwatch button just to the left of the parameter you're going to animate. So pan might be position, scale for zooms, and that's probably all you'll need. So there's my scale, and I'll just go to the end of the shot. Again, I'm hitting minus here to get to it. Also, you can hold down the space bar to turn it into a hand to grab the timeline if you want to move it ahead. And let's say it zooms in until he does the gesture here. So we'll stop our push in about there. Okay, so now I have a slow push. Okay, it doesn't frame it very well, I'll notice. He kind of goes off camera there. So maybe we also add a little left-right movement. So in that case, we'll, right at the same beginning point, say yes on the position. And we'll try and sit on the exact same place for the end of the move too. You'll always know you're at the end when you can actually navigate between keyframes here. The little diamond here says you're sitting on a keyframe. and this is the go back to the previous keyframe. This is the go ahead to the next keyframe. So we'll just do a little reframe here to favor him a bit. And now it's going to zoom in and pan a little bit to the left. Or, in this case, it looks like it's just zooming in on him, right? Okay, so one thing about that is that that's a subtle move. That's a slow, gentle move. If you want it faster, just pick up the tail end of that and move it closer. As keyframes get closer together, the speed of that will pick up. So something like this will be a snap zoom of sorts. I think we could go a little faster. Let's go just before his move, and let's put it crazy close together so it becomes a little whip. Right? Now, they are a linear move, which means when it starts, it hits full speed right away, and when it stops, it comes to a dead stop. So it's a little mechanical, and it's perfectly fine for an animatic, but you might want to introduce a little nuance to your move. So let's say it, like a zoom would, picks up speed because somebody's operating that zoom, they need to go. So I would need to start slow and end fast. So to make this a little bit more complicated, we've got the ability to change these not to just linear keyframes, but keyframes that ease in or ease out. And that's the easiest way to handle this. So select it. We can go to Keyframe Assistant with a right click. You'll see ease in and ease out. So ease out would mean I'm slowly ramping up, and ease in would be I'm slowly slowing down. So I could do both, but in this case, I don't want to ease into that move. I want to ease out of that first keyframe. So if I say ease out, the icon changes, and now we'll see that it, very subtle there, subtle difference. Look at the difference here. Kind of mechanical. Go back to ease out. It's just a little bit smoother, a little bit nicer. With some of these other moves, it'll be a little bit more obvious because that's such a short one. But I almost always will use an ease. It's so easy to get to, and it just looks more finished as a result. Just think about how it plays in terms of your narrative. Does it make sense to slowly creep up to a speed? Is it a dramatic thing? The camera's coming in close and you want it to slowly come to a rest? Or is that the joke and you want to play that up? So if I like those, I'm good to go. I can just render this stuff out. But I don't like it. I'm going to undo it. If you ever want to get rid of everything, you can just turn off the stopwatch. It erases everything. So keep in mind, stopwatch you click once is like the record button. As soon as you start changing those parameters in a different time, you create animation. If you hit the stopwatch again, you turn it off. So it's click it on, go to a different part of the timeline, change that parameter, and you'll get animation interpolated between those 2 points. So it's the big leap that you have to make if you've not done this kind of thing before. So I will now reset this to where it was. That was 960 tab, 540 tab, and 100 for the scale. So now back to normal here. So let's do this as a simple pan. I did not plan for a pan on this, so it's going to come onto the characters from emptiness. So he's the first one to talk. He's the second one to talk. So it makes sense to kind of come onto him first. So I will start with a position keyframe. Notice I hit position, but I've also put, this is the end position. This is where I want it to end. So whenever I do that, and this makes a little bit of sense here, is I'll just move it to where I want that to stop, and then I'll change where that's going to be. So maybe it's as the camera arrives on him, pans in. Okay, you see that kind of jerkiness to it? See what happens if we ease in to that keyframe. See if that looks a little bit more appealing. It kind of slows down to a stop there. The farther apart those keyframes are, the more likely you'll see the benefits of the ease in and ease outs. So now it'll be a real slow delivery. Okay? But it doesn't feel, it feels 2D because we've basically taken a sheet of paper and slid it. In order to get a more realistic Dolly move, we need to crack into this composition. So the couple ways we could do it. I've got a lot of layers here. We could animate each of them so that they slide at different rates. That just sounds really awful and tedious. So a better thing to do would be to actually make them work in 3D space, if we can do that. So if you need parallax, and tell you what, let's come back to this shot as a real parallax shot. We'll do a cheat parallax with the last shot, that number 5 shot, because that's one that was never designed to be real 3D. All right, so once again, I'm going to paste in my background that's not in there. Starting to regret having included that as the part of the main background, but okay, this shot really needs some work, right? No animation at all. So I drew it as assets, as elements. I knew I wasn't going to try and do any of this in Photoshop. So we've got a couple of signs, road signs, and the car itself, and so on. So let's do this a little bit at a time. I'm going to zoom in. I always thought that with this road, I would just go flicking back and forth between those two, so it kind of looked like hand-drawn lines just to give it some life. So let's just do a real quick split there. If you do something like that, you can see the benefit of doing it in here. Instead of duplicating and working with lots and lots of layers in Photoshop, let's do this. I'm going to make them 1, 2, about 4 frames a piece. So let's go function 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to take my road items and I'm just going to trim them to 4-ish frames each. And I'm going to alternate them. So we'll get kind of a A-B thing. But they have to be on for that to work. A-B, A-B. So I just want to kind of continue that. Let's go ahead and duplicate it. Slide it on down. Duplicate it. Command D for duplicate here. Slide it on down. See, it's kind of checkerboarding there because they were separated, but it's okay. You get the impression. It's a short enough shot that this technique is better than maybe doing a lot of other stuff for it. I guess I have to do quite a bit. I'll just do the first few seconds there. Right? So yeah, you know, it doesn't look like much, but it's alive. So maybe the audience gets the impression that it's the road is sliding by rather than it being fancy. I figured that was like a way to give it some life without a lot of effort. I'm going to do a couple more. It's so fun to copy. So hopefully I didn't leave any blank spaces there. Okay, let's deal with the signs. So what do we have here? That's road sign number 1. Let's do this background sign, which should actually be under the car. Let's fix that. There we go. Because it's on the other side of the road. All right, so it's got to go off camera, and I want it to scale back into the horizon. So it's probably not going to look great, but let's give it a try. So for position, notice whenever you want to pull up a specific parameter, you can hit P for position, S for scale, R for rotation, T for opacity, transparency. You'll see me do that trick, so I'm not having to twirl down all of them, but I'm going to position it off, and off it goes. And we'll assume that it's the first sign to go by, so it'll start right away. And at the end of its move, it will go all the way to... Now you can pick it up in here and move it, or you can do the numerical slider, whichever one is more comfortable for you. Let's have it actually go off. So without scaling, let's go. They're driving a little fast. Let's back that off just a little bit. I actually want the audience to see it. Let's go even slower. Okay, so there's enough time to read it there. They're doing about 35. Let's pick up the pace a little bit. 50, 45. Okay. It's not getting smaller, which is a problem for me. So here's where I might twirl it down so I can see the relationship of those. I will start with a keyframe at 100. I'll go to my subsequent keyframe, and maybe I'll go, let's try 10%. See if that looks wacky. I don't know. It's okay. It's okay. We can probably keep going with that. So 100 to 10 over the course of about a second and a half. That's not bad. Okay. I buy it. I'm going to save this because I'm sure to screw something up if I don't. All right, sign number 3 is done. Sign number 2. Which one is sign 2? Okay, it's kind of a big one. Sort of in the wrong place to start with. That's okay. I think I moved it in so it didn't get cut off. And drew it in that position. All right, so I don't want it to happen right away, but let's have it come on right about there. So that's my trim option and the brackets to start it. My first position is off. That's the car. Damn it. Car is always going to be there. Option bracket, P for position. Off he goes. I might scale it past 100 here. I feel like it needs to be bigger. So I'll start at 125. P for position, and send him off into the wings, as it were. Give him a keyframe. Now it's closer to camera, so ostensibly it's a little bit faster because of parallax. So I said about 1.5 seconds. And let's position it off. For me, it's easier to bring it on numerically and then whisk it off. And actually, it's going to go up like that, isn't it? Because it's got to follow the perspective of the shot. Once again, let's get our initial scale keyframe and our final scale. I'm going to go with a 10. Let's see how wacky it is. Okay, so what we have there is a case of bad position. It's right at the end. I think it's wrong at the beginning. So what I can do is, very important that we're sitting on that keyframe as we make a change, because watch what happens if I do it in the middle. It's going to add a keyframe, which is neat but wrong. It's more fun by a long shot. So I'm going to sit on that keyframe and I'm going to go, moving them both. See how I accidentally have the whole line together? Somehow both keyframes got selected. So now I'm going to pick that one. There he is. Okay, so maybe he's more like that, which makes a little bit of sense because it actually has a vector that follows the parallax of the road. So here we go. Doesn't seem very big now. Yeah, okay. Seem fast? By a little bit? I think it does. So easy to change the timing on it. Now slow. Don't worry about that. Okay. It's starting to feel like a thing. The background stuff isn't moving at all, and that's weird to me, so I want to move that tree line. Let's see what we got. I do not see it moving. Make sure we got it. That's him. Oh, resolution is high enough that it's choking the machine, which is weird because it's like 1920 by 1080. So, all right, so I noticed that I didn't make it bigger than my final panel size. So I can't move it much, or I'm going to need to alter it. So I'm going to cheat by scaling it. Where are you at here? Tree line, scale. And I'm going to, here's a little trick. There's a set of locks here that keep the proportions correct. I'm going to unclick that so I can narrow that up and lengthen that by a lot. So I'm cheating and making it longer. And it's trees, so it doesn't matter. Go to my first frame here. Control, that's not it. Function, there it is. Set it to, let's see, it's going to go that way. So I need to start here. Bang, and I'll go to the actual end of the shot and extend it that way. I think that's right. Might be wrong. This is one I'm really going to need to massage the speed on, I bet. But I was going the wrong way. Now, if you do that, it's real easy to just flip it. Just take one keyframe and switch it. So by reversing them, we're reversing the action. Okay, I kind of buy it. Let's do one last thing, which is we'll give you automatic animation for free, which we love free animation. So the car needs like some activity, right? Needs some bumping. So let's put in a free bump here. This is an expression, but it's also like the easiest expression in After Effects, so it's one that I know. So we want to wiggle in position. To get to expressions, we're going to hit Option on the stopwatch instead of just regular click it. And suddenly we get this little text field into which we can put this magical expression, wiggle, is actually the name of it. And we get to say, in parentheses, how many pixels is it going to move on the X and Y, comma, how many times per second. So let's say it's 20 pixels every 5 frames. Let's try that. So 20 comma 5, close parentheses, and then I'll hit not return, but in fact enter. And I don't have enter on here, so it's I think it's function return. Function return. All right, now watch the car. All right, almost perfect. I might just stop there. Let's overdo it intentionally for comic effect. Wisconsin roads in spring. Wisconsin roads in January. It's not changing, is it? That should be crazy, and it's not. Very interesting. We can ramp up the number of hits. That'll really piss it off too. Right? So you can see the relationship between those two things. Let's go back to where we're sitting. Okay. So I don't know why it's very subtly moving, but that looks perfect for what I want to do. Now, what we do see is that the foreground stuff moves smoothly, so it may really stick out in the animatic. If we're looking at our previous shot, oops, we got to do one of those trims again here. All right, a previous shot feels really static because there's not a lot of animation. Then all of a sudden we cut to this, everything's kind of moving smoothly sort of scenario. It's not that smooth, but it might look a little different. Here's a little trick that I like using for animatics. If you want to kind of bring the style of it together to match the hand animated stuff with the keyframe animated stuff, select the shot itself in here, and we're going to do what's called Posterized Time. It's an effect. It's under time, and it says Posterized Time. And to posterize it means instead of being 24 frames per second, we're going to turn it into X. So instead of 24, if we say something like 12, it's going to make it jerkier, which is a really weird thing to request in here because you're usually wanting to make things really smooth, but that feels a little bit more hand-drawn. So that's an option if you find that you've got sort of a disconnect between the hand-drawn stuff and the mechanically accomplished stuff. Questions on those couple of tricks so far? I'm going to stop the recording. We'll take a break here. We'll come back. So for this one, I thought maybe we could arrive. I know that the image is going to be maybe missing parts, but I think this is the most likely to survive the process of having some parallax added to it. We've got a midground, which is the sort of tree line stuff back there. We've got characters and the car. So we're going to set this up as technically a real 3D shot with cards in space and a camera that moves through it. This is more probably than you really need for what you're doing, but if this is something that appeals to you for some sort of staging reason, then this is a tool that you'll enjoy having. So here's my problem. I want to put them all into their own sort of Z space. So the background can be the farthest back, the midground, the next farthest back, and so on. Right now I've got 3 frames representing my center character there, Varla. So I'm going to actually kind of flatten those. Flattening in here isn't going to throw the information away, it's just going to group it. So that is called precomposing. And I forget where it is here, because I always have, yeah, there it is, because I use the shortcut. To precompose is to take them, group them. You'll see them appear to turn into a single line here when we do that, and that's fine. If we were to double click on that line, we have access to those original parts. So it's always good to label it. I'll call it Varla midground comp or something. Composite, so we know what we're talking about. But back to shot 1 here, where she is. And maybe for the sake of control here, I'll trim that down so I'm not chasing an extra piece of tail on the end of that. All right, so background. we're going to send back the farthest in space. To get to the controls that we need, we're going to have to hit this button at the bottom which says Toggle Switches and Modes. So up until this point we've got something that looks a lot like Photoshop because we've got our multiplies and screens and adds and things like that under here. If we click this, we get some things that are sort of particular to After Effects, things like frame blending and motion blur. Let me show you what motion blur does real quick on that last shot. So one thing that makes the signs going by feel weird is that there's no blur, which there would be if it was moving that fast. So if we switch over to modes here and we turn on blur for the signs, motion blur there and there, and maybe we'll even do it to the car. Watch the, it would be the one sign passing by that doesn't have it. And then you also have to turn it on for the comp. There we go. Okay, so now, see how it's smeared? So it'll look smoother as a result. Because whenever we see something that's that sharp, that isn't blurred, moving that fast, it looks wrong to the eye. Okay, so in here though, we've got a new control which is 3D layer. We're just gonna turn it on for all of them. Background, we'll send that one back in space, let's say 500. Okay, and we've also, it's gotten small as a result, so we'll scale it up. Midground, we'll send that one back 300. Actually, no, we'll send it 500 because there's no detail on the back wall there, so it's all going to look the same. And we'll scale it up to fit. All right, Varla, if that was, let's do 300 for her because she's sort of the farthest back, 300. And that's the X, Y, and Z position there. So I'm hitting Z, which is the last one there. Maybe we don't need to scale it. Let's find out. Mitch and Benny don't move, and layer 1 is their outline. So I'm going to put them on the same layer, and I can either pre-compose them. Let's go ahead and do that. Or I could change all of their parameters equally, but I will send them back in space 200. Okay. And then the car will leave where it is. We'll leave where it is. Let's try that. Okay. So nothing appears to have happened. They kind of changed size a little bit. I could certainly go back and cure that. Here's where it gets a little wild. We're going to add a camera. That's under new. Where is it? Layer, new. Layer, new, camera. And we can just use the defaults for that and say OK. We now have a camera in the scene, and we can be looking through it by clicking on camera 1. Okay. There's a camera control, which is C for camera. And you can see what I've got here. I'm kind of tumbling through that, right? That's weird and fun. So you could make your own 3D movies out of here, too, if you ever wanted to do that. So basically, I want a little start position and an end position. So I'm going to undo my little tumble there. And we will change the initial position to, well, we want a parallel. We want a parallel move. This would be fine if we're doing like a kind of a dolly. That's kind of neat, too, though. I might just, say that's fine. That looks cooler. And it's not much effort, and suddenly you've got space, which I think for camera is a real big deal. You tend to see animatics like this are done as just 2D things, and trickery is done to make it feel like depth, but here you have depth, and it only took a second to set it up. To do a straight dolly shot is actually kind of difficult because it wants to focus on the same center point of the shot. It's actually pointed right at the middle of the shot where it still has been, so it looks like it's tumbling. So in order to fix that, we're going to actually animate two things about the camera: the point of interest and the position together. I believe the best way to do that is to set them both together and animate them together. So there's my start position, and there's the end of the shot, so we got to be done by then. And my position. So let's see if that worked. Okay, so you can see the parallax working on the guy on the left in the background being moved separately. Car is kind of just gently coming into shot there. Notice it's taking a lot longer to preview. It's because we're actually taxing the machine a bit here now. So now that it's loaded, you can see the green line here says that it's loaded into, yeah, that's what we wanted. That looks pretty cool. There's a little bit of squish there, but maybe for as fast as it goes on camera, it's not bad. But obviously you can do a lot more if you don't want to keep it flat and want to actually do something with some snaz here. We start with that. The C for camera tool does not only tumble, but it also does in the middle mouse wheel position and the right mouse button push in. So you can imagine do a little something like, let's come over here a bit, let's push in so we don't jinx the car. And now I've got a little bit better than a dolly push in, right? Just do a little slight move to the left, or right rather. Let's commit to that a little bit. Middle mouse, a bit more. And you obviously, as you go too far, they start to card out on you, and the perspective gets wrong. So you gotta be gentle, but that's still pretty subtle. So if you know it's coming, you can plan for all of that stuff. Work in layers, figure out what you need to get parallax on and what you don't need to get parallax on, and flatten and group accordingly so that those are easy to use. One last thing, which is probably bigger than we have time to do, but if you're 3D savvy and you feel like the card thing is restrictive, but you want to somehow combine 2D and 3D. This has the ability to make 3D files right in here with a plugin of sorts, which is the light version of Cinema 4D. So if you're familiar with Blender, Max, Maya, things like that, you'll find that Cinema 4D is not too different. I'm just going to make a quickie here. It will actually launch this software, which is its own application. And Cinema 4D is a really great application. The light version ships free with After Effects. So for example, if we wanted to build a little set with a couple of blocks or something, this is a terrible set, but call it good. And maybe this is what the characters are going to interact with. If you know more about modeling and want to do more complex things, or maybe model somewhere else and import those models, we can do that. But what we then have in After Effects is that becomes a file. So if we, for example, wanted to say, well, let's put those guys in the 3D world, just drop that in as a layer, and there it is. You can animate the camera in both so that they'll move together. It's a little bit more complicated. This is obviously fine for an animatic, but you have the ability to show the final version of it too, which is instead of current shading, what would it be? Fine, yeah. So I'll give you the, without the grid. I like the grid in there, it's kind of nice. Now, it's going to treat it as a 2D plane in here because the camera is not moving in 3D. So to get the camera to move in here, you'd actually animate it in the 3D world, which is good because the camera tools are way better, and then bring it into here as a project and start placing your 2D stuff inside that file. So it's there if you want to dig in. I think the more important thing is, what can we do minimally to get the story elements across and not get too hinky-dinky with craziness, because the storytelling is at its core going to be the thing that we're grading first and foremost, right?